to Ceasefire, where we seek to bridge the divide in American politics. I'm Dasha Burns, Politico White House Bureau Chief, and today we will talk to governors from both sides of the aisle who have agreed to keep the conversation civil even when they disagree. Maryland Democratic Governor Wes Moore and Oklahoma Republican Governor Kevin Stitt. Thank you both so much for joining me from your respective states.
Thank you so much.
It's good to be with you.
For having us.
All right, gentlemen, let's start with the organization that you are both a part of, the National Governors Association Executive Committee. Governor Stitt, you're the chair. Governor Moore, you are the vice chair. You began these terms back in July, just this summer, so not that long, but you are doing a lot of work together. Governor Stitt, why don't we start with you? Can you highlight some of the work that you all are doing across the aisle that people might not be aware of?
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's really good for Americans to see that we don't always disagree, that we actually like each other, we can agree on some things. And as governors, we have a unique perspective that we literally are trying to make our states the best places to live, to work, to raise our families. We're focused on the economy, healthcare, infrastructure, education, and I know Governor Moore is focused on making Maryland the very best state, and I'm focused on making Oklahoma the very best state. And that's the cool thing about governors. And sometimes Washington, D.C. tries to divide us, and this national politics gets so messy.
Yeah, I see why you both didn't want to come sit at the table here in Washington, D.C. and stayed safely in your states, because, yeah, right now, I mean, the divisions in Washington are pretty striking. Governor Moore, what has it been like working with Governor Stitt? And I mean, yeah, it looks like Republicans and Democrats might be able to get some stuff done together, maybe just not in D.C.
Well, and I've loved working with Governor Stitt because in Governor Stitt, I know it's someone who believes in the people of Oklahoma and someone who believes that best ideas and best practices can be found anywhere, both in Democratic and Republican states. And the only thing we're trying to do is just to make sure that each and every one of our states have the best chance of long-term prosperity and the best chance to make it the best livable place for the people in our state. And I think about it from my background. I know also from Governor Stitt's background is that, we don't come from this world of just broken politics, that we're the chief executives of our state. And for me, my background is I was an Army officer. I led soldiers in combat. And I never once asked my soldiers, what's your political party? It never came up. And it's the same thing as governor. It's not something of an interest to me. I will fight for anybody, whether they live in the Eastern Shore or in Western Maryland, as long as they're a Marylander. That's all I need to know. And so that's the great thing about the work of governors, is we are going to fight for all of our people, no matter their political affiliation, because the work has got to get done, and we've got to be the ones to make sure that things happen.
Governor Stitt, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Just before we started filming, you told me that if you and Governor Moore were sitting here in Washington today and you were in leadership positions on the Hill, you'd probably be able to get this government shutdown solved. So what is your advice right now to your colleagues here in D.C.?
Well, first off, I mean, I think you have to go back. I think it's back in 1996, the last time that there was an appropriations bill that was done on time, and it was in Clinton administration the last time we had a balanced budget. So I just encourage us, we have to get back, Congress has to get back to debating and actually passing a budget. I think that's what we have to do at our kitchen tables as Americans. That's what we do as state leaders. We have to live within our means. And it's my understanding this is a clean appropriations bill. It's just continuing the Biden level funding. And, we may disagree on this issue, but we need to get government back open. And the Trump administration won the last election. Let's move forward and let's get this thing going. But really the real issue is let's go back and make sure that we are passing a budget and debating how we're spending the taxpayer dollars. And I think that's a really important point that we've kind of glossing over, because right now we're spending $2 trillion over our income. That's unsustainable long term.
Governor Moore, what about you? What do you say to Democrats on the Hill right now as the government is going into its third week of a shutdown?
Yeah, no, I'm in complete agreement, and I think every chief executive would tell you that it is absurd that the federal government is shut down now. I mean, right now what we have is we have people in our states who are working and not getting paid. And we have people in Washington, D.C. who are getting paid and not working. Like, it is so backwards. And there is no reason that our federal government should be shut down because, as Governor Stitt said, this is something that states, we don't have the luxury of just shutting down. Families don't have the luxury of just shutting down. But somehow these folks in Washington think that it's okay. And I think about how absurd it is that we are now talking about, we have people in Washington who are talking about a prerequisite of reopening the government is jacking up premiums by 95%, or in my state, kicking 250,000 people off of healthcare that they rely on. You know, I just came from a roundtable literally just 30 minutes ago of veterans. And it's not lost to me that 1 in 4 federal workers are military veterans who are now suffering the consequences of this. So I could not agree more that for each and every one of us, we believe deeply we've got to reopen the government, we've got to be able to get the work done, and we've got to make sure that we aren't punishing the American people because we want to make sure that we have a government that is open to the American people.
Well, Governor Moore, to Governor Stitt's point, given the detrimental effects of this government shutdown on federal workers and on the economy that relies on them, and all of the downstream effects here, this is a clean CR. And Thune just said that he would be willing to hold a vote on the ACA subsidies after the government reopens. Should Democrats consider a different approach here?
I think we need to make sure that we get the government reopened. And I also think we need to make sure that the basic health care for our people is being met. I know when I go around and I speak to the people of my state who already know that the cost of health care has been exploding, who already know that the basic supports to be able to keep healthcare affordable continue to erode. When we're watching what's happened in rural healthcare in my state, the fact is that we've seen over the past few months that around $250 million was just cut from rural healthcare in my state. We're watching facilities in the Eastern Shore and in Western Maryland close. People are deeply, deeply concerned. And I think the frustration that people have is right now there's this idea that somehow a prerequisite of opening up the federal government and giving people their jobs back, letting people go back to work on doing essential work, also means that we're going to close rural hospitals and cut off health care for people who need it, cut off that health care for families with disabilities. And so I think we need to show the American people that we can both walk and chew gum at the same time, that we can both be efficient and also be humane at the same time, because there's a lot of people in our states who do not see that combination happening from Washington, D.C.
Governor Stitt, Governor Moore just talked about some of the impacts that he is seeing from the shutdown and also from the healthcare fight in his state. How are Oklahomans being affected by this right now?
I know that if it continues to November 1st, we'll have to make some decisions with SNAP benefits, some different things in our state as well. But that's one thing that we've been working on as a state is an Oklahoma model to let the federal government know how we can do more with less if you give us block grants, if you give us more flexibility. Oklahoma is different than Maryland, and Texas is different than Kansas, and Florida is different than New York. If we allow the states more flexibility with how we administer health care, how we use our rural pharmacies to deliver health care, and telemedicine, and to reorganize some of that delivery mechanism, I think we can make a lot of headway, and it's not washed through the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. So the states collect taxes from our citizens. We send it to Washington, D.C., and then Washington, D.C. washes it through the bureaucracy, and then they return it back to the states. So my point has always been flexibility, so that's one thing. Secondly, Congress has a tough job. I mean, we've got health care needs, you've got infrastructure needs, you've got national security needs, you've got the State Department, you've got all these issues, you've got infrastructure needs, but you have to have a limit, and that limit is called revenue. And if we would simply go back to 2019 spending levels, which was $4.4 trillion, our revenue today is $5.4 trillion. We'd have $1 billion surplus. but instead our spending just is out of control, and we're increasing spending $2 trillion over our revenue. So again, it's unsustainable. Our interest cost alone is more than national defense or Medicaid. And so we have to have some real conversations about that. And I think one of the answers is to slow the spending side down. Our revenue will grow out of it, but we also need to give the states more flexibility so Wes Moore can take care of Maryland and I can take care of Oklahoma.
Well, Governor Stitt, I'm sure you know that the people are concerned about health care and the ACA subsidies. There's a shutdown politics of it. Then there's a longer term politics of it, which even Republican pollsters say, look, if people's premiums go up, this is going to be tough for voters to swallow when it comes to the midterms, and it could be really bad for Republicans. And then there's a very practical impact of, people in your state really struggling to pay for their health care. Should Republicans, I asked Governor Moore if Democrats should take a different approach on the shutdown. Should Republicans maybe try taking a different approach, given this is an issue that really matters to their voters too?
Well, like Governor Moore said, I mean, we've got a clean CR. This is just returning back to opening the government, getting the funding levels where they were previously. And so that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that everybody's willing to talk about those issues, but passing a clean CR to open the government seems to me like the right thing to do at this point. And it's a clean CR, meaning it looks like one side's trying to add more spending in there. And we can debate that, but I don't know if you debate that right now when we're actually trying to take care of American people. Now, the other thing that's really weird for most people is November 21st is when this current CR expires. So let's say we got a deal today, we're back having these conversations November 21st. This is a weird way to fund your life, right? You don't do this around your table at home, and everything is politics. And so let's get back to what our founding fathers envisioned, and that was actually Congress debating appropriations bills. Let's fund what we need to fund, and that's part of the election process. And if it's the ACA bills or the healthcare related things, then let's get them in there and let's debate it. Let's come up with the best thing for the American people.
Governor Moore, your response to that?
Well, I have to tell you, I actually want to echo something that Governor Stitt mentioned before, is that the spending really is out of control. We're now seeing how we're going to spend more on interest.
That's a Democrat agreeing with a Republican on spending, by the way, just to point that out to our viewers.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to spend more on interest than we are on defense. This is just completely unsustainable, where we are now adding trillions of new dollars to the national debt. And again, the thing that does get me, and I think gets all of us as chief executives, is that's not how we do our work. We balance a budget every single year. And in this past year, I think about what's happened in the 3 years since I've been the governor of the state of Maryland. We've actually decreased the size of the general fund every single year, i.e. decreased the size of state government and actually created better results on a smaller budget. This last year, we ended up cutting over $2 billion from our budget, which is the largest cut to Maryland state budget that we have seen in 16 years in the state of Maryland, because we've got to be more efficient with our dollars, and we've got to be clear about, are you actually investing things that have larger societal return on that investment? And so what you are seeing is states who are having to get creative, states who are having to get thoughtful. In the case like in a state like Maryland, particularly because Maryland has had bigger impacts because of Washington than any state in this country. We've now had over 15,000 Marylanders fired since the start of the Trump administration, who are federal workers. And so it is forcing all of us to think about, how do you have economic growth, but also economic diversification, so we can be reliant on the ability of our state to be able to move forward. But I could not agree with Governor Stitt more. The spending that we are seeing, the adding trillions of dollars to our deficit, it is not just unsustainable, it is deeply dangerous, and particularly deeply dangerous to those future generations.
Governor Moore, does that mean that you agree with some of the cuts that the president is trying to make to the federal government?
Oh, I absolutely do. And listen, one of the first hires that I made as governor to the state of Maryland was a chief performance officer. Their job is to go in and basically well, their job, and she's done a remarkable job. A woman, Asma Mirza, has done a remarkable job of going in and figuring out what are the things that are duplicative. what are the things that we can be more efficient and streamlined? And so we've been able to look at everything from fleet management to technological consolidation to looking at our entire real estate portfolio and saying there are certain things that are sitting on Maryland's books that I'm like, why is this sitting on our books? Get it off our books. We don't need it. And so there's a lot that you can do to be able to create increased efficiency, to create a better performance, and to also be able to think critically about your budget. But there is a way of doing it in a humane way. There is a way of doing it that is actually data informed and not ideologically driven. And that's how we're choosing to lead in the state of Maryland.
And gentlemen, I want to move on to a little bit of tension involved in with your organization right now. I think this headline sums it up pretty well. Governor Gavin Newsom and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker want the National Governors Association to speak up about the president's use of National Guard troops in cities. The Democratic governors say the NGA is not taking a strong enough stance and not standing up to the White House. Governor Stitt, as NGA chair, should the National Governors Association make a statement on this? What is the organization's role here?
Well, I'll answer that, and then I'll tell you, I made a statement on it, and but here's the deal. You've got the Democrat Governors Association on one side. You've got the Republican Governors Association on the other side. So those are the political entities that are advocating for the Democrats and the Republicans in this case. The National Governors Association is in the middle, and it's a bipartisan group of governors that are focused more on policy, education, permitting reform. It's another thing that we agree on. Governor Moore, Governor Shapiro, we've been working together to do a permitting letter to Congress. So that's what the National Governors Association is for. And yeah, the Democrat Governors Association, they're gonna make their political statements just like the Republican Governors Association makes theirs. But the NGA is supposed to be working together. And when you're a bipartisan group, it's tough because half the country thinks one way and the other half thinks the other way. And so it's messy and we have to lead, but we can't take our ball and go home just because we're not as reactive as these sides are. And so, but the thing is that I came out publicly and got some criticism from both sides, but basically just said, hey, if the shoe was on the other foot, we're not going to want the Biden administration sending troops into Oklahoma from another state.
You said Oklahomans would lose their mind if Pritzker and Illinois sent troops down to Oklahoma during the Biden administration.
That's exactly right. And so, but at the same time, we support President Trump's ability to take troops and federalize troops in Illinois to take care of Illinois problems. There's a lot of case law. There's history with that. President Eisenhower did that in Arkansas over the protest of the governor. LBJ did it in Alabama over the protest of the governor. But the point was, let's not pit one state against another. And, President Trump has a tough job when you see some of the crime and the ICE stuff that's going on. But again, there may be a difference of opinion with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But the National Governors Association, we're supposed to be working on policy, and I'm sure the DGA is going to make their statements and the RGA is going to make their statements, and we're kind of stuck in the middle trying to focus on policy on our states.
Governor Moore, do you agree with Governor Stitt about the role of the NGA, or do you think that the organization should be taking a stronger stance here?
No, I have a deep disagreement with the positions that the Trump administration have taken on this of overruling governors, because I do think this is a fundamental states' rights issue. I think that part of the job is that we're actually should be working in partnership and not being dictating. And it's the same reason why we have had historic drops in violent crime in the state of Maryland over the past 2.5 years, where literally when I became the governor, Baltimore City was averaging almost a homicide a day. Now, the last time the homicide rate was this low in Baltimore City, I wasn't born yet. And we're seeing that all across the state of Maryland. But the reason we're doing it is because we're working in partnership with our mayors, with our county executives, with local law enforcement, with community groups. And that's all we're simply saying, is that we would appreciate if the administration would actually work in partnership with us instead of trying to dictate. It is a violation of just basic state rights. And I applaud Governor Stitt for his personal statement on it, because he's right, that if this were happening to a Republican state, as he said, they would lose their minds. I do think it is important as an organization, as an NGA, that we continue to grow, that we continue to evolve, that we continue to be thoughtful about what does it mean to bring people on board, and what does it mean to make sure that we can navigate in this new type of climate, in this new type of waters. I know that we had our executive director, Bill McBride, who just recently announced that he was stepping down. There'll be new leadership coming on board for the NGA, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with Governor Stitt and other Democratic and Republican governors around the country who understand that the only future we have got is a future where we are going to move together, where best practices can be identified anywhere around the country, and that we are willing to work with anyone to be able to advance the interests of the people of our own individual jurisdictions. And we want to build an organization that is responsive to that.
Yeah, I'm curious about the consensus around best practices here, because we have seen Democratic governors objecting to the use of National Guard troops in their state. So Governor Stitt, and I'll ask Governor Moore about this as well, but can Democrats and Republicans agree to some rules for balancing the state versus federal authority here? What might that look like?
Well, like I said before, my only point was, let's not send Texas to Illinois, or let's not send California down to Oklahoma. Let's let each state take care of their own issues. And the point that I would disagree with Governor Moore on is the President of the United States has the authority to federalize the troops in that state. And so President Trump has a tough decision to make, because when he sees ICE agents being attacked in a certain city, even though it might be over the objection of the local governor, the President of the United States has that right to do that. And there's case law there. President Eisenhower, over the objection of the opposite party governor in Arkansas to desegregate schools, called in the National Guard. And so there's case law where that happens. And when the President of the United States wants to federalize those troops, we all agree that he has the authority to do it. Should he work with the governors? 100%. But then the question is, when there's a disagreement, when he calls Governor Newsom and says, hey, I'm going to send him in to protect a federal building, and Newsom says no, then who has the authority? Well, it's pretty clear in our Constitution that the President of the United States has that authority, so we support President Trump on it. The only thing I cautioned was, let's not pit one state against another. But I mean, I sent troops to the southern border in support of Governor Abbott, and I'll send them to Pritzker if he wants me to do something, or I'm going to send them to Memphis if Governor Lee calls me. But
upon
that's
request,
I guess
that's
big
the big
rub.
difference, right? Upon the request of those governors. It's so interesting to hear you both talk about this, because I'm hearing this kind of like flipping of the script of Republican talking points versus Democratic talking points, because Governor Moore, what you're saying is essentially a long-held Republican position around the primacy of states' rights over federal authority here. What's your perspective on what you're hearing from your colleague here?
Well, no, and actually, and I completely agree with Governor Stitt that the president has the authority to do it. My question is the judgment. Whether or not it's the right thing to do. And I think about it in context of this, and again, as someone who, I've deployed with soldiers overseas, I've worn the uniform of this country. I've served with people who are willing to put their life on the line. And all of us, each and every one of us as governors, we serve as commanders in chief of our National Guards. That is a responsibility that we take very seriously, and we owe it to the people who serve in uniform. We owe it to their family members to be very, very smart and very sober about how, when, and where we mobilize these remarkable men and women. And the point that, the president absolutely has the authority to do it. The thing that I would hope for is that don't forget who we are asking to mobilize. These are citizen soldiers. These are people who have jobs, people who have families, that we're asking them to leave both of those things, because they trust the judgment of the commanders in chief. And so when I look at what we need when it comes to being able to address crime inside of our neighborhoods, I've been very clear. I would love to have a serious conversation with this administration about things like license plate readers and things like the elimination of Glock switches and being able to make sure that ghost guns can become illegal, and making sure that we're not cutting the budgets for violence reduction organizations like we had in Maryland, where $30 million was cut towards community groups and community violence interrupters. Like, those are serious conversations. Adding FBI and ATF assets. These are serious conversations about how you can continue to significantly reduce the kind of crime and kind of numbers and see the kind of results and reductions that we've had in the state of Maryland. But I just do not find the idea of adding National Guard for municipal policing functions to be a serious ailment or a serious treatment for the larger ailment of violent crime. And if there was a partnership that existed between our federal government and the states, where states' rights does come into this, I think we could get to a better result.
Governor Stitt, would you welcome National Guard, federal help in your state from the president?
Sure. I mean, if we thought one of our cities needed it, I've personally called the Guard up for certain things that are going on in the state of Oklahoma. If we needed it, the state can do that, or we could call our president and he would do it. Governor Moore makes some great points, and of course, it needs to be only in the most serious of situations, and the president, in coordination with those local officials, elections matter. Whoever the elected governor is responsible for their state, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess, Governor Stitt, what is your advice to, as a governor, as a Republican governor who agrees with a lot of what the president is doing, what is your advice to President Trump for how to communicate and how to work with governors across the aisle, as you have done?
Well, first off, that's back to my point to everybody listening out there. Also, the elections, President Trump was duly elected by the citizens of the United States, and why is everybody trying to tear him down when let's all work together? When did one side start trying to tear the other side down just because they lost the election? We're all Americans. So the real point is, if there is a disagreement like there was with President Trump and Pritzker, who wins that disagreement? Sure, they should coordinate, they should talk, and I'm sure they are talking, but there's a fundamental disagreement with protecting those federal buildings, and that's where the President of the United States trumps it and is allowed to call those National Guard up in the state of Illinois. Then the courts can get involved and it can get messy, and there's a bunch of ants on this ant pile fighting this issue right now. But sure, like Governor Moore said, we're all Americans. Let's work together. But there is some crime issues, and I think President Trump is trying to this open border situation that in our opinion was started in the Biden administration. It has consequences today. President Trump ran on really trying to get immigration and get some of the violent illegals out of our country, and I think he's going about doing that the best he can.
Ants on the anthill, that's a new one for me. I'm going to tuck that away. I want to take us back in time for a second. Governor Moore, you're going to have fun with this one. This is our trip back in the C-SPAN time machine. I want to show you a clip from then 27-year-old White House fellow Wes Moore appearing on C-SPAN's Q&A with Brian Lamb in 2006. Here's a treat.
Well, as you know, it's been written, and your friends have kidded you about being Mr. President.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably more so because I've been class president throughout that time.
How many years class president?
6 years. Class
Regimental commander for how many years?
1 year, 1 year job, and again, whether it be through politics, we'll see. But I know public service is something that I'm devoted to.
But the famous picture of Bill Clinton in the Rose Garden with John Kennedy when he was Boys Nation.
Absolutely.
Do you think of that when you're going around? When you're in these positions? Do you look around that White House and say, this is pretty nice?
I look around the White House and say, some really amazing men have walked through those walls, and amazing men and women have walked through those gates, and I'm just honored to be there.
Look at that fresh face, Governor Moore.
He's so young. Oh my goodness.
Wow. Governor Stitt.
That's pretty amazing.
Can you believe at 27 years old?
Hey, you've got to text me that picture, Governor Moore. I can't see it on my end, so I can't wait to go back and watch this.
We'll send you a link to that. But look, Governor Moore, you said you're not running for president. You're focused on winning another term as governor. But I got to ask,
right.
When would you consider running? Or considering
When would I
running?
consider running for governor?
When would you consider a White House run? Considering a White House run. Anything you can tell us about it.
I'm not considering it. I tell you, not only do I absolutely love the momentum that we have here in Maryland. I mean, we've gone from 43rd in the country in unemployment to having amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country, amongst the fastest drops in violent crime anywhere in America. Added over 100,000 new jobs since I've been the governor. Over 30,000 new businesses have started or relocated to the state of Maryland. So, I'm really proud of what we've gotten done. And we're able to address the issues that I care deeply about, like addressing child poverty, like being able to figure out and support our men and boys here in the state of Maryland. I'm really proud of the work we're doing. And, this is the first elected office I ever ran for. I would be more than satisfied if this was the last elected office I ever ran for as well. I love what I'm doing. I love what we're getting done here in Maryland.
Governor Stitt, our politics have changed so much. What the Democratic Party looks like, what the Republican Party looks like, and really a ton of voters are all over the map here right now. We saw in this last election, President Trump gaining huge ground with Black voters, with Hispanic voters, with young voters, winning surprising boroughs in New York City. And I think one question I have is what your advice might be for Democrats who are interested in. I think people can no longer just campaign to blue areas or red areas, right? So if Democrats are looking to potentially, if they're running for president, win over some Oklahomans, what's your advice?
Well, that's every state's different. It's amazing when I think about the 50 different examples of democracy, laboratories of democracy around our country, because it is true. I mean, New York is different than Oklahoma, and we're closer to the people, and so I don't know. We're a pretty red state. I don't know what advice to give on the Democratic side in Oklahoma, but one thing I would say is stop getting on the fringes, both the far right, the far left. I think 80% of the country is taking their kids to piano lessons and soccer practice, and they want to live the American dream, and they want government out of their lives, and they want to make sure that they can save for retirement, and they have a better life for their kids than they have, and they want the best education system. They want the best infrastructure, access to health care. Those are the things that can unite us, and it's unfortunate that we're so divided on some of these things. But the thing that I keep scratching my head on the Democratic side is they keep doubling down on like boys and girls sports and some things that I think are losers, at least in Oklahoma. And I think most of the people nationally think that's a weird stance to make a part of your platform. And I think they need to get back to, hey, what do the majority of Americans want? And that's safe communities. That's a great education system for our kids. And I think if we can get back to working together and making America great again, and making Oklahoma a top 10 place to live, and making Maryland a top 10 place to live, that's what the people want. They don't like all the division.
Well, we've seen you both find some common ground here, so maybe you'll inject some of that into Washington, D.C. now too. Governor Wes Moore, Governor Kevin Stitt, thank you both so much for joining Ceasefire.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dasha.
Thanks, Governor Stitt.
Hey, thanks, Wes. Talk to you soon.
Let's turn now to this week's C-SPAN Flashback, where we dig deep into the video archives to show you a moment in political history that's eerily similar to what's happening today. 12 years ago this month, a federal shutdown began after House Republicans refused to fund the government unless the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was defunded. Let's take a listen to then President Obama.
This Republican shutdown did not have to happen, but I want every American to understand why it did happen. Republicans in the House of Representatives refused to fund the government unless we defunded or dismantled the Affordable Care Act. They've shut down the government over an ideological crusade to deny affordable health insurance to millions of Americans. And while last night I signed legislation to make sure our 1.4 million active duty military are paid through the shutdown, hundreds of thousands of civilian workers, many still on the job, many forced to stay home, aren't being paid. even if they have families to support and local businesses that rely on them. And we know that the longer this shutdown continues, the worse the effects will be.
The 2013 shutdown ended after 16 days. Congress voted to reopen the government without repealing the Affordable Care Act. Flash forward to the 2025 shutdown. Obamacare once again a central issue, this time Democrats looking to extend pandemic-era subsidies that keep premiums down. We've got two political pros from both sides of the aisle to talk about the shutdown and other hot topics of the week. Adam Jentleson, a top aide to former Democratic Majority Leader Reid, and Doug Heye, Deputy Chief of Staff to former Republican House Majority Leader Cantor, and also a former Republican National Committee Communications Director. Thank you both so much for being here. A reminder, we do things a little differently here. You guys are coming on not as surrogates, as strategists. You're going to peel back the curtain for us about what's going on. But what we just saw there, a little PTSD, Doug?
Yeah, the biggest part of the PTSD for me is I agree with what President Obama said on that. Republicans did cause the shutdown. And what's interesting to me is that how it was caused wasn't just House Republicans. It was some Senate Republicans who really urged on a fraction of the House of Representatives, House Republican Conference, to fight. And so we often talk about how history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And it's rhyming right now, because when I look at what Republicans did in some of those meetings I was at in 2013, it was, we've got to fight. We've got to fight Obamacare. We've got to fight. Okay, what's our strategy? We didn't have a strategy to win the round, to knock down our opponent, whether that was Obama or Reid or Nancy Pelosi or anyone else, metaphorically, of course. We didn't have a strategy to win. Fighting was our preeminent goal. And what I see right now with Democrats is something very similar. We have a shutdown, same schedule, in early October, about Obamacare. And it seems right now to me that the message is more about fighting than it is about a solution for how are Democrats going to force Republicans to reopen the government. What is their strategy to beat Donald Trump on this? I just don't see it yet.
Adam, for you watching that video, was that deja vu, PTSD, rhyming? What are you feeling here?
It was, my main feeling was I missed that guy. President Obama was such an incredible communicator. And that's something Democrats are missing right now is someone who's capable of driving a message on that level. However, I think they are doing a good job with what they have to work with. I think that Democrats have succeeded in using the shutdown to drive a national conversation about healthcare, which remains one of their best issues. And whether it's because Republicans have always historically been the ones to shut the government down, whether it was in 2013 or back in 1996, 1998, they have a reputation problem as the ones who tend to do this. So far, at least, polls universally show that the public blames Republicans for shutting down the government. They're also in unified control of the government now, which was not true about Democrats in 2013. Republicans controlled the House.
Back in 2013, though, that ended without Republicans getting what they want. Is it going to be the same for Democrats this time around? What is the same and what's different now?
That's right. I mean, 2013, it was just sort of an unadulterated loss for Republicans. They basically caved. A difference then, though, was that, as Doug was alluding to, it was sort of this band of insurgents within the party. Ted Cruz, who was a new senator at the time, sort of leading the party into it. And Republican leadership back then was not shy about saying that they didn't want to do it, and they were basically being forced into it by the base. So there was disunity among Republicans during the shutdown, which is part of why they caved so quickly. In this case, Democrats are very united. The question of how they claim a win is one they're going to have to answer. But I think, the smart thing to do would be to figure out a way to claim a win, pretty soon, and then carry that momentum forward into 2026.
The Republican posture right now, is it the right one? Are they going about this the right way as this drags on? Do they need to change their approach?
I think so far they feel that it's working for them. The last poll I saw this morning, AP said that 60% of the public blames Republicans, 54% blame Democrats, which means a lot of people are blaming both. And as Washington is just a completely broken city at this point, Mike Johnson's message is a very simple one. We did our job. We voted to keep the government open. You obviously have Senator Thune saying the same thing as the Senate leader. So their messaging is very simple here. But how we get out of this, I don't think anybody really knows. And one of the big differences to me between now and then is when I worked in House leadership, we were busy. I remember getting a text message from a college friend of mine asking me if I was enjoying my vacation. And I responded with language I won't use here, that it was 9:30 on a Saturday morning and I was at my desk. And what we did is we had votes every day. Today we're voting to keep the Department of Energy open. Today we're voting to keep the Department of Labor open, and on
How's
and on
this
and on.
even around right now?
They're not even around because they don't feel that they need to. And both parties are performing to their base right now, I think, rather well. And that also, I think, keeps the stalemate going till certainly through Halloween, if not Veterans Day, and God help us if it's Thanksgiving.
I mean, the parties aren't talking right now. Back in 2013, like, were you guys talking? Was leadership talking to each other across the aisle?
We weren't talking,
No.
but the leader, they were definitely not.
You would never.
That's right. No, I mean, look, like the Republicans were divided. They weren't. Their heart wasn't in it in 2013. I mean, I think that, and they, you know, they caved pretty quickly. So you know, there were a lot of signals coming from the Republican side back then that they wanted to find a way out of this mess. But yeah, the lack of communication now is striking, and I think that's going to be an issue. I think one of the challenges Democrats will face is, you know, it's easy to drive attention to something early on, but especially in this fractured media environment that we're living in, as the shutdown drags on and just becomes kind of a fact of life and sort of fades into the background from a news perspective, it gets harder and harder to use it to drive a message, which is why they, I think, would be wise to figure out an end game here while they're still on top.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big differences is just the sheer amount of news also that is coming out of the White House. I mean, while the shutdown was going on, I was on Air Force One with the president heading to the Middle East to talk about this new peace deal, right? So it's difficult to keep the public's attention in this era specifically because of how Trump is doing things.
That's true. And also voters have short memories when it comes to things like this. And we're talking in October of an off year, not October of an election year. And so ultimately, it's while whatever happens, and when we went through the 2013 shutdown, one of the reasons we did this is, remember Speaker Boehner saying in meetings repeatedly, you've probably heard the phrase, well, they're going to have to touch the stove, meaning the House Freedom Caucus, which was starting to form at that point, those members needed to touch a stove and get burned and realize that it came with a real political cost.
Does that even exist now? Is there a stove?
It didn't exist last time, or the previous time, and in 2013 as well, because voters have moved on to whether those next 2, 3, or in Donald Trump era, 15 things have been. Paul Kane, who I see Adam quoted in his columns all the time in the Washington Post, wrote, there are a lot of things that happen, a lot of attention garnered during a shutdown, but the ultimate political effects are pretty negligent. Well,
that's, I mean, you know, we came out of that shutdown on the Democratic side feeling like we had this big win in, you know, October of 2013, and then a year later in the 2014 midterms, we got absolutely creamed.
And we were demoralized because at one moment, I remember Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who was the conference chair at that point, holding up a press release that was from Senators Cruz, Lee, and Rubio. I think we've heard of all three of them. And holding in front of Congressman Louis Gohmert's face, a Republican from Texas, was one of the instigators, and saying, your boys sold you down the river on this. And she waved it in his head. So I'm watching our members fighting with each other on the House floor. And so we left that thinking, we're demoralized, we're defeated. And ultimately, politically, it did not matter a year later.
And I mean, the news cycle is much shorter now, even than it was back then. Yeah. How involved was President Obama at that time?
Very involved. Very involved. And, you know, he was in constant communication with Senator Reid, who I was working for at the time. You know, but our strategy was just to hold the line. So there wasn't a lot of sort of tactical daily maneuvers going on. As Doug mentioned, Republicans controlled the House, so they would sort of vote on these bills and try to fund parts of the government that were politically popular, send them over to the Senate. We had to figure out what to do with them, to vote them down or just sit on them. And so President Obama was very involved talking us through that strategy, but really, you know, our goal was to maintain unity among the caucus. I think Democrats are doing a good job right now of maintaining unity, and then to sort of wait for Republicans.
What's striking to me, given how involved and ever present in everything this president is, he's largely left the shutdown fight to leaders on the Hill.
He has, and one of the things that's been interesting is, as the Republican House hasn't been here, Mike Johnson has been everywhere.
I mean, here on C-SPAN.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you'll see that continue. He feels very comfortable in his messaging. It helps that it's a very simple message. We voted, we've done this. The Senate has voted now, I think, 8 times. So having message simplicity is a great thing when you're a leader. You'll continue to see him, I think, out there talking about this a lot, because his message ultimately doesn't change until there's an actual change.
So Johnson, when he was on C-SPAN, committed to coming here with Hakeem Jeffries and having a conversation. Now, Jeffries has also agreed. We don't know when. We have not gotten them to commit to a date. Could be during the shutdown, could be after the shutdown. What do you think that the calculation for Johnson should be?
On doing the interview?
Yeah.
I think ultimately it's what's the resolution going to be. He doesn't want to do anything. He'll agree to do it. And remember, the job of the principal is to say yes. The job of the communication staffer is the one to say no.
Reel them back in, yeah.
They're the positive face, we're the negative face. But what is that outcome? And ultimately, what happens in this process? The process over the next few weeks is going to be very interesting, because one of the differences is, while Barack Obama tried to inflict political pain on Republicans, he did so in almost a milquetoast fashion compared to what Donald Trump is able to do, both because the presidency is stronger and a president, especially this one, becomes stronger in a shutdown. And so I'm looking at Democrats in a way potentially sort of having Jedi mind tricked themselves that by saying fighting is enough, that when Donald Trump really starts to make some of these layoffs and other permanent changes in government that he feels that emboldened to make right now, that ultimately they've allowed this to happen, which politically may benefit them by saying fight, but in a policy way would be, I think, devastating to them.
Adam, what do you think, though, for Jeffries, the calculation would be to come on a program like this and sort of come face to face in a civil way with Mike Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeffries and Schumer both see this as an opportunity to show that they are fighting. And I think that's something that Democrats have really been looking for from their leaders and haven't seen a lot of this year. And I think they're doing a good job of demonstrating that. So I assume because of the setting, he will be civil, but I think it's also an opportunity for him to drive the message in a strong and forceful way. And I think that's a good thing. And I think one of the differences here is that, you know, Democrats have been sort of unsatisfied with their leadership throughout the years. A lot of the polls showing Democrats' approvals being quite low are because a lot of Democrats are not enthusiastic about the performance of their party and their party leaders. And so Schumer and Jeffries both are using this as an opportunity to show that kind of fight that the base demands. I do think that one of the things Democrats can do is, you know, take a win here and then play it forward into the midterms. A difference between the dynamics in 26 and the dynamics in 2014 is that Democrats are the out party going into a midterm where the other party controls all of government. Typically, the out party does well in those midterms. So if they can sort of play this forward, the fundamentals right now do favor them in the midterms, and they can just carry that energy forward in a productive way.
Given how disillusioned voters are, though, with Congress in particular, and now literally shut down. I mean, people are frustrated with nothing getting done, and now truly nothing is getting done. Would it behoove the leaders to show that they can at least engage and talk to one another?
I think independent voters want to see some of that, but ultimately what the result is more important than what we see in the process at this point. But certainly Republicans feel comfortable in two things: that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are not Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid. We had real fear. Yeah. I ran the Fire Pelosi bus tour campaign in 2010. We did that because we thought Nancy Pelosi was a really fierce opponent. And the other is, I know Senator Thune certainly feels very comfortable in saying Chuck Schumer voted just earlier this year in a very open and easy argument to make. Let's just pass a clean CR. That's an argument, even though CRs aren't an ideal way to run government, it's a very easy argument to make, and it's a good way for Thune to push back. He feels very comfortable there.
So Thune was on MSNBC this week. He told Ali Vitale, the MSNBC host, he has offered Democrats a vote on Obamacare subsidies, one of their big sticking points in this shutdown. Take a listen.
And I've said we are willing to have the conversation. I've said if you need a vote, we can guarantee you get a vote by a date certain. At some point, Democrats have to take yes for an answer. But I agree totally. We are all about getting health insurance down, making it affordable to more people.
So I hear you saying about the program that needs reforms. It sounds like you're guaranteeing that there will be a negotiation on this.
Well, what I'm saying is there's a path forward, I believe.
But yes or no?
But it has to include reforms. And can I guarantee an outcome? No. I mean, and that's what people want to say. Guarantee us that this is going to pass. I can't guarantee it's going to pass. I can guarantee you that there will be a process and you will get a vote.
Adam, how should Democrats handle that?
So the part he's leaving unspoken there is that the vote would likely fail because it wouldn't get 60 in the Senate. So what he's offering Democrats is a chance to sort of get on record voting for what they want, even though it will fail because Republicans won't support it. I think one of the things that's sort of going under the radar here is that because Republicans have unified control of government, they could actually reopen the government on their own. They have majorities in the Senate and majorities in the House. They could pass a clean CR if they want to do it. So Democrats are asking for something in return for their votes. The obvious sticking point here is the filibuster in the Senate, which is what requires it to get more than a simple majority to pass the Senate. Traditionally, Republicans have been against going around the filibuster. The difference is this year, twice already, they've made reforms to the filibuster and gone around it when it suited them. So they have a little less credibility now in saying that they're ardent defenders of the filibuster, because just 3 weeks ago, they were making changes to it when it suited them. So if they wanted to reopen it, they could do it themselves.
Doug, what is Thune's strategy here? What's he doing?
I think he's trying to, one, remember that there's an audience of one. And so it's interesting to see John Thune on MSNBC. That's not typically the channel that Donald Trump watches. Maybe he was watching Mamdani on Fox the other day, which is also another interesting dynamic. But he's trying to play to his Republican conference as well, and his audience of one of Donald Trump. And that is ultimately meaning hold firm. You know, Donald Trump is not somebody, you don't score points with Donald Trump. He only takes them away one at a time. So unless he has a deal that he feels is a good one that can pass, that he can bring to the president, he's going to hold firm. But one of the best things that John Thune has going for him is everything he says sounds reasonable. And he comes across in a very sort of matter-of-fact, reasonable way that benefits him. He's not a fire breather.
Yeah, those optics matter. For Democrats, they are showing fight right now. That's something voters have been asking for. But Democrats are still struggling to erase Republicans' polling advantage on the economy, which voters constantly tell us is their top issue. Adam, this piece cites polls showing Republicans still have an advantage on the question of which party do you trust on the economy, all this despite Democrats playing hardball on rising healthcare costs. So what's going on here? Why can't Dems make up some ground on the economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge that they face, because even as Trump is losing ground, I mean, these polls also show that Donald Trump is coming in with
Democrats
some of his,
are still below.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump is coming with some of his worst approval ratings ever on the economy, but Democrats are struggling to get people to like them instead as the alternative. I think part of the issue is that they're focused on too many issues. I think Democrats have a problem as sort of as a big tent coalition where our messaging often is sort of about, giving something to everybody.
Well, and Trump's strategy is flood the zone, which means Democrats are trying to respond to so many different things.
And we often respond with what comes across to voters as a laundry list. And I think, actually, you mentioned Mamdani. One thing that Mamdani did very well, I think, the lessons you can learn from what wins in New York City are somewhat limited, but one thing he did quite effectively was clear the decks of other issues. One of the reasons he was able to focus so relentlessly on affordability in a way that really connected with voters was that he didn't take the bait. He focused all of his messaging on that issue. Democrats are doing that here with the shutdown. They are driving healthcare back into the national conversation. So as they look to what lessons they can take moving forward, this is one of those things, was to really you have Bernie and AOC and Jeffries and Schumer and all wings of the party all pulling and rowing in the same direction. And that's been effective for them here. That's something they can carry forward to try to bring those numbers back up.
So, Doug, President Trump does still have an advantage on the economy, but those approval ratings have been ticking down. Is there a risk with this trade war? We've seen the markets are now sort of pricing it in, right? But small businesses are still concerned. There's still so much uncertainty because still every week there's a new number and a new threat that he's throwing out. What's the calculation there and what's the risk?
Well, the risk is obviously what people are seeing and spending every day. And this was true 2 years ago, 4 years ago. It was a problem for Joe Biden. And it's now Donald Trump's problem. And whether he wants to admit that it's his fault or not, or whether it is his fault or not, and politically, that's the reality. And so anytime anybody goes to a grocery store, goes to a movie theater, a restaurant, fills their tank up with gas, they're in a bad mood. And I think countering that is very difficult. But you start by communicating that you understand it and that you're acting on it. Right? And you get then, I think, a wide latitude with voters. Maybe they don't agree with everything that you're doing, but if they see that you're trying to solve the issue, housing costs it may be, maybe the cost of food, then you get credit. The problem is when you have all these tariffs on everything, and businesses are communicating these tariffs. You'll get emails from various stores that you shop from. This is now going to be 10% more or 20% more. We're adding a surcharge for this, and it is because of, it may say Trump tariffs, it may not.
And Democrats can pull that and say the Trump tariffs, right?
And a problem with the strategy that Doug outlined is that these tariffs are entirely self-inflicted. Mm-hmm. This is something that Trump went out and did himself on purpose, not in response to anything. And many within his party were telling him this is a terrible idea. Republicans traditionally have been very against tariffs and protectionism. And so it's a little tricky for Republicans to get out of it because the tariffs that are driving up prices for American consumers in every walk of their life are entirely inflicted by Trump making the choice to impose these additional costs on Americans. So Democrats have a wide open lane here to drive that message that all of these cost increases are because of a decision that Trump made. And that's it. And that's based in reality. And it's something that consumers are going to continue to encounter in every walk of life as they go to the store.
Doug, what's your message to the White House on how to plan for this and how to work this?
I think it was Al Gore or maybe Bill Clinton who said we're going to focus like a laser beam. This is the number one issue to voters overwhelmingly. Yes, there are global events that you have to react to. I thought that the events in Israel were very positive, not only for the Middle East, but for Trump politically. But this is the number one issue on everything, whether it's housing costs, whether it's food costs, whether it's healthcare costs, which goes to the shutdown issue. You have to be talking about this every day. Donald Trump can't depend on Democrats' numbers just magically remaining lower than his. He has to do something to build his own back up.
Guys, before we go, I want to introduce you to a segment we've got here on Ceasefire called Not on My Bingo Card. You know, our politics has gotten a little bit weird. There are a lot of unexpected, interesting, awkward, quirky moments that we love to highlight. And this week, I actually witnessed this one firsthand overseas in Egypt. Take a look at this long handshake between President Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron. It started out mostly normal before the changing of the grips there. This happened as world leaders were gathered in Egypt to mark the Gaza peace deal. Social media posts compared it to a WWE match. Of course, the president is a big fan of those kinds of performances. The entire thing lasted, you'll see here, 26 seconds. Have you guys had a 26-second handshake? Anyone beat that record?
No. Not until I saw Doug in the green room before. No, but I mean that was definitely a macho mano a mano grudge match going on there.
Doug, have you had the pleasure of shaking hands, doing the tussle with the president?
No, and Donald Trump has a history with that with Macron as well. It's a very weird thing. Donald Trump is huge, and he likes to emphasize size. Macron, I've met him. He's not exactly a tall guy. Clearly, that is part of Trump trying to impose himself on Macron and on the global scene.
And Macron's trying to give it right back to him, not letting go. So a nice moment between those two. We have seen the handshake multiple times now. We'll see what happens next time. Maybe here on Ceasefire we'll have to beat that record.
Yeah, we'll give it a shot.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both so much. Adam Jentleson, Democratic strategist, and Doug Heye, Republican strategist. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dasha.
And we'll close this week's program with our Ceasefire Moment of the Week, highlighting what's possible when politicians come together as Americans, not just partisans. A group of lawmakers in Minnesota are making headlines by finding common ground in an uncommon way. Here are Minnesota House members Max Reimer, Sandra Feist, and Patricia Mueller singing in a quartet as part of the Civility Caucus, bringing Democrats and Republicans together by putting politics aside as they get to know each other better through meals, laughs, and even a little karaoke.
It's really understanding people as human beings, giving them the benefit of the doubt, giving them better communication tools.
If it's a good idea, if it's common sense, let's do it. Doesn't care if it's Republican or Democrat. I wasn't quite sure what to expect other than I knew I was going to be going into a room full of people that were interested in working together to just get stuff done.
It's really about making the connections that are beyond politics, but about the personal relationships that we as legislators should have in order to perhaps move into policy making in the future.
In the polarized climate we live in right now, constituents may want you to be a fighter. I think it's a balance. I think it takes a certain amount of courage for anyone to engage in civil discourse, but probably especially legislators.
Bipartisan dialogue, what we like to see here on Ceasefire. That's all the time we have for this episode. And a reminder, Ceasefire is also available as a podcast. Find us in all the usual places. I'm Dasha Burns. Have a great week.